Hello, this is the Old Geek, and you are listening to Tale of the Manticore.
The following podcast is intended for a mature audience. Listener discretion is advised. Welcome back to Tale of the Manticore, Season 3. Like the creature from which it takes its name, Tale of the Manticore is a mashup, a crossbreeding between two different species of storytelling. Here you will find the unpredictability of old-school paper and dice games with the storycraft of a dark fantasy novel. No character is sacred, and none will be spared if the dice decide their fate is at hand. According to lore, the tail of a manticore is barbed with cruel iron spikes. There will be much pain in the days ahead. Last time, on Tale of the Manticore. In the last chapter, Fairwind concludes the story of Morok and talks about why he fled Camertine. He's come here, he says, on a holy mission to lift the ancient curse of the Camors. He further explains how the restless dead walk the ruins at night, but seem to avoid the church he now calls home. Achillea shows him the skull she and the others found back in the ogre's cave, and tells him about the strange dreams she's been having. Fairwind takes it all as divine providence. To him, Achillea and her companions were sent by Sadal to aid his mission. Together, they decide to investigate the area nearby, where the throne room would once have been, since the spirit in Achillea's vision was searching for something there. Next, in a flashback, we get a deeper perspective into Tentir's character. It seems that the young elf is unhappy with the strict confines of his race's code of behavior. Elven culture frowns upon individualism, but he wants to be something special. When we return to the present, we rejoin Fairwind and the PCs, who have found their way to the site of Morok's former throne room. Here, Achillea discovers something, but it has nothing to do with the cursed king or the prince at all. Fairwind casually mentions the name Odok and is surprised by the strong reaction it elicits. When Achillea shows him the sketchbook, he confirms that the artist is indeed the same person as the famous historian he has been referring to. Chapter 18, Part 1, Day 16, Afternoon. Mythic event meaning: open success. Party status: Achillea, 7 out of 7 hit points. Cord, 5 of 11. Direni, 9 of 9. Tentir, 10 of 10. Supplies: the companions have 5 portions of food and 21 of water. Spells available: Achillea has memorized Message ×2. Cord can cast Entangle and Locate plants and animals. Achillea stared into the cleric's eyes.
Fairwind, you must tell me everything you know about this man.
Everything?
Fairwind could not understand why Achillea's tone had shifted so dramatically.
Achillea, I'm not sure what you want to know. Odok Zygog is the most prolific and most knowledgeable historian on Marith. He is widely known, even among those who do not consider themselves academics, and to those who do, he is famous.
Fairwind held his free hand open in a gesture of helplessness.
You know where he lives?
Of course not,
was the simple reply.
No one does. You have one of his sketchbooks. I admit, I have never seen its like before. But what is so important about it, and why do you need to know where he is? Zygog is a recluse, and he goes to great pains to ensure he cannot be found.
But I must find him,
said Achillea, exasperated.
And you must help me.
I am sorry, Achillea. I don't think I can.
Cord, Direni, and Tentir had caught up by now, and while the construct could understand their words, the brothers could not. All the same, they could tell just by looking at the open sketchbook and hearing the conversation's tone a little bit about what it concerned. Achillea felt her face go hot. How could she come so close only to lose the thread again?
Think, Fairwind. Anything you can remember about the person could be helpful. I need to find this man.
She considered adding that the quest to find Odok was what had brought her party to these ruins, but decided it would only confuse things.
Please.
She added. Cord was now clearing away bits of bramble and nettle from the floor of the old throne room, searching for anything out of the ordinary.
Well,
said Fairwind, scratching his cheek in thought.
I have heard a few things about Zygog, but they amount to rumor, no more.
I will hear what you have to say,
replied Achillea, her tone serious and low.
Very well.
The cleric began.
He is said never to have taken a wife, and to have left society to live in the wilds. Some say he went west into the Camranthian wilderness. However, other accounts place him in Zacia, where he lives under a false name as part of the magistocracy.
Tentir looked askance at Dureni, who listened intently as Achillea spoke with a human, but did not interrupt or ask questions. He burned with curiosity at what they might be saying, but the only words he caught were names, Odok and Zacia. It wasn't enough to really follow their conversation. If Dureni had not been there, he would have pushed his way in and asked Achillea to translate. But since Dureni said nothing, he said nothing. He had gotten himself into enough trouble as it was by refusing to show proper deference to his elders, and he was trying to change. Of course, with Dureni it was easier, simply because Tentir genuinely respected him. Between the Lines. Back in episode 11, I did a Between the Lines section, in which I introduced my approach to elves and orcs. In it, I mentioned that elven culture is chaotic and wild in its expressions of art and architecture. Since then, through a series of dramatic personae sections, I've discovered that other aspects of their societies are very regimented and orderly, valuing conformity and strict systems of right behavior. It's kind of shaping up that external things are left to be wild, while internal things are rigidly structured. I'm really just making this stuff up as I go, and as Dureni and Tentir reveal their characters to me. But I think it's time to pull back and take a look at the bigger cultural picture. How does this yin and yang of order and chaos manifest? Well, some examples of strict regulation would include norms concerning respect and age. With all elves of Marith, as a core value, youth show deference to any age above it. We can see this in Tentir's attitude towards Dureni, or between Dureni and Barrand. The trouble following Tentir's outburst to Elmir illustrates the point as well. Law and chaos existing in harmony is not a self-contradiction. It makes sense for this society that lives in very close quarters with one another to have evolved into a complex system, and I like the complexity of it. It makes me excited to explore elven culture more fully. I think that Achillea would too, not only in an academic sense, but in practice. Actually, I can't think of a person who'd be more motivated to learn the nuances and how to navigate them. I wonder what else we can determine about elven culture using the little bit we've learned so far. In Season 1, we heard about a tribe of elves that lived in the woods, but Dureni's tribe lives in the Satevi Marsh. What would such a settlement look like? I think they'd have dwellings that were elevated, either treehouse style like barren sentry platform, or, far more likely and practical, houses on stilts. Speaking of practicality, as much as a community based in a swamp might sound quite unlikely, a quick Google search shows me that many such cultures have existed throughout history, and there's even pictures of the kinds of homes they had. As one would expect, these are structures of wood, fully or partially raised up on stilts. I don't imagine waterways and boats as part of this particular geography or way of life. The Satevi Marsh is a patchwork of solid earth and soggy swamp, with the occasional pond and pool, but no rivers or lakes nearby. Some of the drawbacks of living in a marsh could have a positive side for the Satevi elves. The community would be very hard to invade, especially with a large force. Conversely, it would be easy to defend. All of the hazards would double as layers of protection, and a culture that had become accustomed to them would enjoy a huge advantage in a fight. Furthermore, a swamp village would be all but immune to forest fires, which would certainly pose a threat to forest-dwelling peoples, especially in summer. Finally, there would be abundant food and water. One has to acknowledge certain downsides, however. There'd be a scarcity of metal and textiles. Husbandry and food storage would be much more of a challenge than in a dry place. I think that a secure trading partner would be a requirement. Durrani and Tentir's chainmail shirts and their swords could not realistically have been made by any member of their tribe, despite the existence of things like bog iron. No, my impression of elves as a xenophobic race won't really work. We learned a few episodes ago that the first rule of the Satevi Marsh tribe is that no strangers may enter their lands. Therefore, we have to assume that some of their number are sent out to bring supplies back. Of course, Durrani is one such outlander. He's a hunter whose job it is to bring in supplies. I can imagine other elves whose roles include diplomacy and trade, so that the tribe can get the things that they cannot make for themselves. Chapter 18, Part 2, Day 16, Afternoon. Mythic event meaning: open success. Party status. The party's status is unchanged. Achillia and Fairwind seemed to be in the middle of some kind of serious exchange when a shrill peep from Robin drew everyone's attention. The stuffed bird was perched on top of Cord's shoulder, right where the split in the construct's torso was healing with new wood. Cord had just cleared away some brush and was staring down at something. The wooden face with the painted-on expression looked up slowly. Then Cord pointed to his ear.
Listen,
said Tentir, filling with excitement. Perhaps if they hadn't been talking so much and so loudly, they would have discovered it earlier. It was the distinct sound of water, as if it were being poured from a spout and into a bowl or a bucket, though it was somewhat quiet and muffled.
There's a hollow under us,
breathed Achillia excitedly. She abandoned her conversation with Fairwind and came around to the ruined dais to where Cord stood. Parting some crabgrass, she found what she was looking for.
There's a floor tile here. One corner has broken off. That's how the water is getting in. I think... Cord, give me a hand. I think we can lift this tile up.
what?
Fairwind seemed as confused by this as he had with the other business about the historian.
There's a tile that can be removed.
Explained Achillia.
Come and help.
The third pair of hands was not necessary, it turned out. Cord and Achillia already had the tile up and off to one side by the time Fairwind and the elven brothers came over. Now they all looked down into the square of darkness revealed by the tile. The rain continued to fall all around them and into the hole. Tentir squatted next to Achillia and squinted into the darkness below.
I see no way down. No stairs or ladder. I think I can make out the shape of the floor.
He got on his hands and knees and stuck his head into the hole.
I think I can see the floor. It must be about 30 feet below. I can't make out any walls. We must be directly above a room. On the ceiling, if you take my meaning.
He was searching in the wrong place.
Muttered Achillia.
Come again.
Tentir looked up, confused.
The ghost in my dream. Prince Lirhain. He must have been looking in the wrong place. I think this is what he was looking for. He said he just wanted to go home, to sleep. I wonder what he meant by that.
Tentir pushed his wet hair away from his eyes.
Ask the human if he has a lantern we could lower down on Durrani's rope.
Achillia asked, but Fairwind had no such luxuries as a lantern. He could get some brands from his fireplace, but he didn't think they'd stay lit for long in the rain, even if they made an effort to cover them, and they would go out if they were dropped into the hole. After some discussion and some translation, it was decided that the best course of action would be for one of the elves to be lowered in using Durrani's rope. With their infravision, they could look around and report back to the people above. Tentir volunteered immediately, but Durrani overruled him, and so it was the elder brother who, with one foot in a loop at the end of his rope, was lowered by the others into the pit. Watching him go down this way reminded Achillia of descending from Baron's sentry platform, and she got a little thrill in her stomach.
Be careful, brother,
said Tentir. He was trying to sound casual, but the set of his jaw belied his concern. Durrani had his sword out and held it in his right hand, while his left gripped the rope to keep himself steady. He said nothing in reply to Tentir, but simply smiled and nodded, signaling his confidence as he was lowered down. One of the questions I get most often is, how does the actual story get made? Does it come from random generators, or do I just make it up? The answer is a bit complicated because it changes depending on where I am in the game. At the beginning, I'm using generators and making stuff up. Lots of stuff. But as I enter the mid-game, and I'd say that now I'm in the early mid-game of Season 3, there's enough detail in the story's wake that decisions going forward often become surprisingly easy, almost to the point where the plot seems to write itself. Characters' motivations and personalities clarify over time, so their actions and reactions become easier to handle the longer that character has been around. Likewise, places and situations can be determined by what has come before. Interestingly, I'm currently in a position to explain this with an example. What is this space below the throne room? Well, it's the royal crypt. This much is fairly obvious. Since the dream of Lyrhain, I've known that the ghost was trying to get back to its grave. The fact of the prince's skull being removed from the tomb at some point necessitates tomb robbers. This, in turn, means that there has to be a viable way in and out. In the past, I also mentioned that the sprites knew what was in the crypt, and, importantly, that they do not lie, so there has to be some way for them to have gotten in and out too. Put it all together, and you get a removable ceiling tile with the corner broken off. That's how the tomb robbers got in, and that's how the fairies got in, even after the tomb robbers had escaped, replaced the tile, and left. The placement of the tile on the wrong side of the dais is also not random, but another detail determined by story past. Its location explains that the ghost of Lyrhain was looking in the wrong place. This makes sense to me. In life, Prince Lyrhain, who never grew beyond childhood, would not necessarily have known the exact location of the family crypt, but perhaps his ghost could sense that it was nearby. Going forward, several things must be a certain way to maintain continuity. The sprite said that there was a wizarding stick in the ruins. If the sprites were in this crypt, then there can be nothing blocking the path. No closed doors, for example, between this wizarding stick and the broken tile opening. Does that make sense? But I'm still of a mind to let chaos roll. What will this crypt look like? How big will it be? Can I add elements of randomness and danger? I have a somewhat weird idea in mind. It's an idea I had but ended up deciding not to use at the end of Season 2 when I needed to generate a dungeon. It was to take my ultralight game One Shot in the Dark and use one of its map generators to procedurally determine the dungeon layout. For certain reasons, it wasn't the right move back then, but I think it might just be perfect for this Kaymor tomb. Here's why. The third level is specifically for creating a crypt. Also, some of the entries are eerily strong matches for what I need. In addition to catacombs and other room types you might expect to find, there's an entry for a weird wizard's study. Well, if I change the word study to crypt, I have a spot for that wizarding stick. There's even an entry for a ghost encounter, complete with a mechanic to determine how it would react to the party's presence. It's almost perfect. Now, I can't use One Shot in the Dark word for word, but I think I can use the spirit of it, pun intended, at the very least. I'll be sure to run things so you don't need to know anything about the game to follow along, but if you do own a copy and you're curious, I'm going to use the 9 of Hearts entry, 20-foot by 20-foot vault, as the starting point. Now, I've already described this room as fairly spacious, so I'll change it to 40-foot by 40-foot. According to the table in the rules booklet, it has only one exit. As the PCs move through the dungeon, I'll draw more cards and use this same table. I'm pulling the used 9 and also the King and Ace out of the deck because those last two won't work well for this dungeon. The target card will be the 10 of Hearts, 30 by 60-foot catacombs. That will serve in this story as the family crypt. I'll say that I need to pull a minimum of 3 cards before the PCs can reach it, so whether this is a very small dungeon or a rather large one is up to fate. Well, that's about it. Will this idea even work? There's only one way to find out.
Win Morgan,
said Tentir, taking the rope from Fairwind and slipping the toe of his boot into the loop at the end.
Ready?
Achillia asked him in Elvish. Tentir said that he was, and the others lowered him down to the crypt floor. Here he joined Dureni, who gave him a quick nod to communicate that there was no immediate danger. Fairwind was said to go down next, but there was still the problem that he could not see in the dark. Achillia briefly tried talking the cleric into remaining above, while the demi-humans, who had the advantage of dark vision, investigated. Fairwind, however, would have none of it, and insisted that everyone wait while he retrieved kindling, firewood, and a tinderbox from the chapel. There was no point in trying to bring a flaming brand across the courtyard with the rain coming down, but he declared that he had sufficient wit to keep a few split logs dry in transit. While Fairwind was away, Dureni and Tentir did a cursory examination of their surroundings. They communicated to those up top that there were no immediate threats and that there was only one exit. Though it defied logic, being in a tomb gave the brothers a feeling that they should remain quiet, and so they did not shout their findings up to Achillea and Cord, but instead used hand signals. Presently, Fairwind returned with his cargo and was lowered into the hole. When he reached the crypt floor, he let go of the rope and moved off to one side. Here, away from the trickle of rainwater coming from above, he began building up a flame, using his kindling and tinderbox. By the time Achillea had joined them, he had a modest fire going. It threw the companions' shadows around the tomb in a way that made them look as though they were surrounded by tall, dark spirits. Good news. I've got a level up to conduct this episode, and I'd better get to it before the PCs run into danger, or I run out of time. I bet you know who's up for a promotion. Of course, it's Cord. The construct reaches level 3 today. Druids get a d6 as their hit die, so that's what I'll roll for new hit points. Here we go. Oh well, I got a 2. That gets minned out at 3. Cord now has a max of 14, which is still pretty good. Looking at the Advanced OSE Player's Tome, I see that he'll acquire some new abilities. Druids pick up some language skills, adding one type of creature at each level above 2. The rules say the language is for sylvan forest creatures, but it makes sense to me that Cord can henceforth understand Robin, even if he cannot actually speak to the bird. What else? He can travel through natural environments without leaving any tracks, and he can move through overgrown areas without penalty. As Cord has no stats, we'll skip rolls for any increases there, but we aren't quite done because Cord will get a new druid spell, this one of 2nd level. Like the others, I'll roll at random, and he'll automatically select it every day. I'm rolling a d8 to see which spell he will get. A 7. It isn't Cure Light Wounds, unfortunately. It's... Slow Poison. Let's see what that's all about. According to these rules, the spell has a duration of 1 hour per level. It slows poison so that only 1 hit point per turn is actually suffered by the recipient. Once the subject reaches their last hit point, they stay there until the spell's duration ends, or they die, or else the poison is somehow neutralized. This is interesting. Characters killed by poison can be revived by the spell if death has occurred within 1 turn per caster level. Despite this revival aspect of the spell, I still question if it has much of a use at all. If you don't have an antidote, what good is delaying the inevitable? But now that I really consider it, that's short-sighted thinking. Delaying poison might allow someone to stay in a fight long enough to help allies survive, for example. But as I read through the full spell description, there's more. The rules say that if a subject was poisoned by a natural plant or animal, the caster has a 10% chance per level of knowing a herbal antidote that will fully neutralize the poison. Now, OSE is very good at answering the questions that immediately come to mind. In the wilderness, gathering the herbs for the antidote takes 1 turn. In a settlement, they may be available for purchase from a herbalist. So actually, if the dice are kind after they are cruel, this spell could be a literal lifesaver. Now, just before we return to the narrative, I need to pull a card from my deck of hearts. I've removed the 9, King, and Ace, you'll recall, so we can see what lies beyond that archway. Well, alright. The others had not noticed Cord's new sprout. Their attention was fixed on the archway to the north. There was no sign of any danger beyond, but Durrani drew his sword all the same as he took a few careful steps towards it. Tentir did likewise.
I'm right behind you, brother,
he said. Achillea patted Cord on the shoulder and smiled. Then her face grew serious.
Where's Robin?
She asked. Cord pointed a dowel finger up at the square of daylight above them.
That's probably for the best,
said Achillea. Cord bowed in agreement, and then the two of them followed Durrani and Tentir as they approached the archway to the north. Fairwind came behind them, carrying a flaming brand from his small fire in his free hand. Ahead, the 2 elven brothers passed under the crumbly archway and entered a straight corridor. If it hadn't been for the human's torch, they would have been able to see to the end, but as it was, their vision extended a mere 30 feet before the firelight was swallowed up by gloom. It was cool down here, and the stone walls echoed in a way that Tentir found disquieting. Although he tried to be brave, he couldn't ignore how the small hairs on his arms stood up and how his heartbeat was beginning to pound. Most elves believed in spirits and the undead, even if they had never seen them. There were enough accounts of uncanny encounters with the supernatural in their histories that, unlike fanciful creatures such as high elves, the living dead was not considered a thing of childish fear and fantasy. A few more steps into the corridor showed that it terminated in a T-junction. All was silent. Tentir thought it was unnaturally so. How he admired Durrani's courage. His older brother was just ahead of him and walked forward bravely, sword in hand. Tentir wished he could be more like that, but he could not deny that in his heart he only wished to turn tail and bolt back the way they had come. He had a bad feeling, a really bad feeling, about what they were going to find in these tunnels. Or perhaps, he thought, what would find them. Durrani slowed and stopped, 15 feet before the tunnel branched off, east and west.
Which way, Tentir?
He asked without looking over his shoulder. He spoke in a whisper, but his voice was steady and calm as a breeze. Tentir wanted to reply, but which way should they go? Left? Right? He didn't know. He had no wish to go in either direction. When he opened his mouth to answer, no sound came out. His voice was stuck in his throat. Durrani must have felt Tentir's fear, for he slowly turned around, looked his brother in the face, and put his free hand on the younger elf's shoulder. Tentir was ashamed to be afraid and dropped his gaze to the floor. Durrani's hand now left his shoulder and touched him under the chin. He felt his face gently lifted, so the brothers once again looked into each other's eyes.
Courage, little mouse,
he said, using a nickname Tentir had not been called for many years.
You are your mother's son. Remember that.
It was exactly what Tentir needed. He nodded slightly, then swallowed, and said,
Let's go left.
Thank you for listening to Tale of the Manticore. If you're enjoying the show and would like to help to support it, there are lots of ways to do so. You can recommend the show online or to friends. You can like and repost episode announcements on social media. You can pick up one of my offerings on DriveThruRPG. You can purchase a t-shirt at www.beararts.store. And finally, you can rate or review the show on your podcatcher of choice. I'm very grateful for all of your support. Speaking of listener support, I just found out that Pendulum, a world-building tool, has achieved gold bestseller status. So extra special thanks to everyone who picked that up. At this point, I'd like to share a brief review, and I do mean brief. Goblin685 writes, "Just so good," on Apple Podcasts. Thanks very much, Goblin685. I tremendously appreciate the review, and you might be my first from Sweden. That's pretty exciting. This episode features the voices of 3 actors. Playing Tentir is Kevin Berenger, Durrani is voiced by Kyle, and David Cooper is back as Fairwind. Thanks to Kevin, Kyle, and David for their generous contributions to the show. For those curious to learn a bit more about Tale of the Manticore, I keep a blog where I post all kinds of show and RPG-related stuff, like art, maps, tables, crafts, and show notes. You can find it at taleofthemanticore.blogspot.com. To get in touch with me, I'm at ManticoreTale on X, Tale of the Manticore Podcast on Instagram, or taleofthemanticore@gmail.com. Oh yeah, I've also finally joined Blue Sky, so get in touch. I'd love to hear from you. The adventure will continue on the next episode of Tale of the Manticore. It's the story where chaos rolls.